Come here and watch this screen, Danny. Let me see what I can do to the lights. I don't know where that glare is coming from. If it's from the lights in front or above it.
I think it's in front. I think it's this one right here. Yeah, that's most of it. Those over there are glaring on it, and those windows are glaring on it. So it ain't no way to really conflict. That got the glare from over here, but the windows, I can still see all three of those windows is right across the screen.
Yeah.
I didn't make me turn this.
Turn that a little bit.
If you turn the screen,
It's just a different set of glare. But that's all right. It really doesn't matter.
How much further is it? Like it's about to come off of it, or?
Now turn it back to the right again. I still see the windows. Right there. That's the least glare that there is. I got
That glares, I can see it from here, but it's showing up good on the screen.
on the screen. We got part of the car. We're doing glare tests. I guess that's one thing we haven't done before. A lot of the things that I find myself doing or performing is I'm thinking, well, this is just temporary. So whatever the inconvenience or whatever the problem is, we don't have to worry about it too much because we'll soon be getting back to normal. So I'm having to rethink all of that. So we got a few of the lights out here and readjusting the screen. Good morning. I'm glad that you're here. It's good to see you, and we're glad that those of you who are tuned in. I do wish that you just can't do everything, but ideally, I guess we need someone who would monitor my Facebook page. So many of you say hello or wave and that kind of thing, and I really don't see those until after we've broadcasted or sent it up. And then the way Facebook has things set up is that when you're broadcasting live, like we are now, there's a lot of interaction from people who are tuning in, and when the broadcast is over, and you save it to it automatically saves to your live stream, but then all of the interaction goes away. You can't tell sometimes how many people viewed or what they said. So we're missing out on a lot. We just need someone perhaps who would be monitoring that and checking it live as we go along. Well, we're continuing to look in the book of Isaiah, and we're at today. I like chapter 1. It's just I think it's one of the most powerful introductory chapters of any book in the whole Bible, Isaiah chapter 1. If there's another one in the Old Testament, I would say Jeremiah 1. Very, very strong, and a lot of great wisdom there and information about our faith and about God. That's what our faith is about. Isaiah 6 is the description of Isaiah's vision of the throne room of God. Very, very powerful. But perhaps the best known and most often cited passage in the book of Isaiah is from Isaiah 53. It is the fourth of the servant songs. We looked at some of the servant songs last Sunday. We didn't look at all four because I knew that I would be looking at the fourth. The fourth servant psalm. They are messianic psalms for Christians since the beginning of the New Testament era. For Christians, Isaiah 53 are the servant psalms in Isaiah, all of them, and all of the messianic passages have been for us about Jesus. It seems very clear to us, though people who do not believe in Jesus or those who do not, within the religious world who do not accept Jesus as the Messiah or the promised one, the anointed of God, then of course they don't see that comparison. But even in the beginning of the church age, in the New Testament era, people using the Bible, using the Old Testament scriptures, which was their Bible, to teach about Jesus. Even we have the story told in the Gospel of Luke where after the resurrection, two of Jesus' disciples, they were not part of the inner circle, but two disciples were walking away from Jerusalem, and they were on their way to the city of Emmaus. And a stranger joined them on their journey, and they were intrigued by him. They welcomed him to walk with them, and they were amazed by the fact that this stranger didn't seem to know what had just happened in Jerusalem. They kind of asked the question, where have you been, under a rock? Jesus could have said, I've been behind a rock. I've been on the other side of a rock. But, Jesus was just playing along. They didn't really recognize him, which gives us some kind of indication that some trickery was at play. Later on, when Jesus had the evening meal with them, it says he broke bread, and suddenly their eyes were open. So he was more or less in a kind of a supernatural disguise. I believe that we encounter, the Bible certainly says that we encounter probably angels every day. The Bible says unaware. And certainly there is not any intent to deceive, but there is some secrecy and privacy. There is some, perhaps you might call, subterfuge, angels among us. I believe also that often the Lord himself is in our midst. He's around us. He's disguised. He mingles with us. He has that ability. And certainly, Jesus is in you if you're a Christian. So, not just pretending, that is, or using our imagination, not just play like, but Jesus is in you as a believer. And so when I interact with you, the great thing about fellowship for Christians is not that you and I can share so much about you and I, but that Jesus is in you. And I find him there. That's the greatest thing about fellowship, is not you, what you're like, what your favorite color is, what kind of music you like, how you dress, what kind of foods you enjoy eating. It's Christ in you. And I find him there. And I trust that you can find him in me. It might not be anything at all intriguing about me or anything you'd like to know, or I might not even be someone you'd like to spend time with, but Jesus is. Well, let's look at this. The fourth servant song actually begins in chapter 52, starting with verse 13. I know in the minds of many Christians, we're not, we don't study Judaism very much. And what we know about Judaism from our study of the Old Testament is always through the eyes of our own New Testament faith. But there have been many people who've claimed to be the Messiah, to be the Son of God. There have been many Messiahs. We might sometimes think it strange that here Jesus came, and he obviously was a unique person. He said things. He did things. His life was a testimony to his uniqueness. And yet, Jesus was amongst a multitude of people who had already professed themselves to be the Messiah. Messiahs had come and gone. Most of them met a very terrible end. One of the recent productions about the Gospels, a movie production. I can't remember which one it was, but someone mentions, they were talking about this new rabbi in Israel named Jesus, and they were talking to Pilate. This is just a part of the fictional side, a conversation that never was not recorded in Scripture at any rate. It may or may not have happened. But anyway, the writer says, well, there's a new rabbi out there. See, a lot of people think he's the Jewish Messiah. Of course, you could not be the pontiff of, or the procurator of Israel and not know who the Messiah was or who he was supposed to be. If you were brushing up on, if you were going to rule the Jewish people, you had to know that they were looking for a great person, a prophet, a great man of God, a man coming from God. But as this person was talking, said there's a new rabbi, and a lot of people saying, and there's a lot of talk, he might be the Messiah. And Pilate wasn't really all that impressed. If I remember the scene, he was practicing sword play with some of his guard. He was pretty adept himself. He was kind of a bully. They didn't want to fight the boss too hard, so maybe there's a little bit of both of those things going on. They were telling them about the new rabbi, and Pilate wasn't all that impressed. And so somebody says, "Oh yeah, well, but this one does miracles." And Pilate said, "Yeah, they all do." When someone pretended to be a Messiah, he probably even thought he was a Messiah. And in every case, there was probably something special about them that, first of all, convinced themselves that they were a Messiah. At least they began to think so. Maybe they had a vision. Maybe they had a dream. Maybe they had a great mentor who talked them into the idea. But I believe that probably in every case, each and every one of them, though false messiahs, had the ability to do something. He had some kind of extraordinary ability of speaking or teaching. And many of them, doctors tell us today that about 60 to 75% of the people who come into their offices are really just suffering from psychosomatic illnesses. In other words, they're really sick, but it's because they're the way they think and what they've thought of them about their condition has really made them sick. So often, doctors dispense placebos. They're just really sugar pills, and they often have miraculous results. If many of the people of the world, then and now, are really just sick, and there is psychosomatic blindness, psychosomatic deafness, psychosomatic diseases that completely inhibit someone from being able to walk or stand. And if you have the ability to touch their mind or to convince them or persuade them, if you have some kind of mental or emotional or psychological or even palliative placebo, you can be perceived as a healer. Converse is probably true. Someone said, someone comes into work and someone says, "Oh, you feel all right?" I've asked everybody who come in today, "How you feeling? Feel okay?" "Yeah, I feel okay." And then you tell them, your color's kind of off. You look bad. If you keep on with that kind of conversation, say, you kind of, by lunchtime they'll be sick and they'll be about ready to go home sick. So, you really look kind of bad. Have you got a fever? You kind of, your skin looks pale. You can talk someone into being sick, but you can also talk someone into being well, and I think that happens a lot of times. But anyway, we might find it hard to believe that Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, could come on the scene of history, and everybody not be absolutely convinced that he was not the Messiah, or that he was. But there had been many. Do you know when Jesus was speaking in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, you know what one of the things he warned his disciples about?
That there would be false Christ.
That's right. False Christ are going to. There are more to come, guys. You need to be on your toes. Even over in the book of Acts, when they were debating against Jesus, when the opposition, they said, you know, we've seen all kinds of Christs, every shape, form, and size. There always had been, there were, and there always have been. Well, however, this is different right here. This is the whole point of that discussion is this. Very few Jewish people were looking for the kind of Messiah that Isaiah is talking about in the servant passages.
They were looking for a military leader.
That's right.
Like a general or something.
Nearly all of the messiahs, we have this hint, especially from when Gamaliel was talking about the touted messiahs in the book of Acts. Most of the messiahs who came along were militaristic. They were rebels. They were zealots. They may have taught and may have had a philosophy or an interpretation of scriptures, but nearly every one of them were gathering followers who knew that a great battle was coming. They were going to fight. I've mentioned this before. On the night of Jesus' arrest, Jesus looks at his disciples and said, how many swords we got? And they kind of rummage through their baggage there and they say, well, we got 2. Jesus said, that'll be enough. That'll be enough. We only need 2 swords for what we're going to do, for what's going to happen. I think if someone had said, we don't have any swords, and let me tell you what, if Jewish people in Jesus' day had a sword, it was lousy. It was a lousy sword. It was dull, and it was old, and it was beat up, and it didn't have good balance. They didn't have Excalibur. They had some old beat up something that somebody had thrown away or something somebody had stolen. Most often in these stories, they're using sticks and stones. How many swords do you think they had? Maybe about 2. Maybe 2. We're going to look here at the kind of Messiah that Isaiah's talking about. First of all, nobody wanted to be that kind of Messiah. Nobody wanted to be this kind of Messiah. And secondly, nobody wanted this kind of Messiah. He says in chapter 52, starting with verse 13, see, my servant will act wisely, and he will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond all human likeness. This sounds like someone who's been injured, someone who has been harmed. He's not talking about someone who had a birth defect or from the time that they were born they were in some way misshapen or had some kind of physical appearance shortcoming. But this is something that he says that they became appalled at him. In other words, you look at him and it looks sickening, because he became disfigured beyond any human being, his form marred beyond any human likeness. This doesn't sound, he says he's not attractive. Verse 15 says, so he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. All right, so this continues on into Isaiah 53:1. This is generally where we start. But those words right there are talking about, and this is somebody says, he starts out by talking him being high and lifted up and exalted, but then it talks about a part of that process is some kind of catastrophic disfiguration.
Well, look what the soldiers did to him. Grabbed his beard and pulled his beard out, beat him with a cat of nine tails.
This quite easily compares to Jesus. In Isaiah's day, for the most part, as I said, it is not common for Jewish people to say, that's the kind of person we're looking for or waiting for. That's our Redeemer, our Rescuer. In Isaiah 53:1 it says, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And so the question starts here, kind of in the second part of the passage, saying, you're not going to believe this. This sounds unbelievable. This sounds like something that you don't want to believe, that you will not want to believe. This is the arm of the Lord. In other words, this is what God is doing, but we don't want to think of things like this as being what God does. We want to think of things like this as the kind of things that God delivers us from or protects us from. What happened to Jesus? We say those are the kind of things that shouldn't happen to good people. But what happened to Jesus was the arm of the Lord. It was God's plan. It was something that God was doing. And he begins to talk very personally about this person. He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. This idea of the shoot or the root is very common in Messianic prophecy. He's called a shoot out of David. In other words, it's like a plant. It's like something that grew, and it's coming out of David's lineage. A root coming out of dry ground. Now, roots don't generally grow in dry ground, so it's kind of a surprise. It's something you say, well, that shouldn't be there. But these ideas, as you read through the Old Testament, look for the shoot, the branch, the root. Here he re-emphasizes the thing about this person's physical appearance. If back then this was the case, 1,000 times more today, we place so much importance upon appearance. We look at the way things appear. We judge things by the way that they look. In the movie Back to the Future, Marty is introducing Doc Brown to the future technology of the video camera. I think that's supposed to be back in 1955, 1958. And he's showing Doc Brown this handheld video camera. And when Marty tells Doc Brown back in the past, he's traveled back into the past, who the President of the United States is, it's Ronald Reagan. And Doc Brown says, the actor? You mean the actor, Ronald Reagan? And then later on, he says, he's looking at this camera, and it's displaying, they've got it set where it'll play on his television, his old black and white television. He says, no wonder your president needs to be an actor. He's got to look good on TV. And I think, though, however, before, I think John F. Kennedy was elected as president. Not so much. Do you know what the greatest barrier John F. Kennedy had to break through in order to be elected president? You know what his greatest problem was?
Being Catholic.
That's it. He was Catholic. Now, they didn't describe him too much as being Christian, but he was Catholic, and they were pretty sure if a Catholic person was president, who would be running the United States? The Pope. Hey, just talk to the Pope. Nobody does what he says. Nobody cares. It's just like being a pastor. The Pope is not in charge of anything. The Pope is not in charge of anything. He certainly wasn't in charge of any American Catholic. John F. Kennedy was the youngest man to ever be elected to the presidency. And he was very good looking. He had a beautiful wife. They seemed like, it was a Camelot kind of scenario. And, however, that was the first time we had televised debates. And Richard Nixon was running against, he'd been Eisenhower's vice president. He was running against Kennedy. And in this television, even though it was just black and white, Nixon was fidgeting and wiggling and sweating and wiping sweat and stammering and stuttering. And President Kennedy, our Senator Kennedy at the time, was just calm, cool, and collected. And just, and he was elected. Now, I believe that as a Democrat and as a Democratic candidate for president, I can look back and we can look now and we can actually see from Kennedy's policies and from the things that he led the country to do and the things that he did as acts of leadership, that he was a decent president. He was actually a very moderate president. He was not liberal. He was not conservative by any means, but he was I guess I could say that I wish that every Democrat today in our country would aspire to be a Kennedy Democrat instead of something else. A lot of our Republicans could learn a lot about our country by Kennedy's policies. Here he says, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. I confess, a lot of the artist renditions, Rembrandt had some paintings that he painted called The Faces of Jesus. Quite a plain, homely-looking Jesus in Rembrandt's mind. But they all still look very, very, very Italian. Good-looking Jesus. Well, here Isaiah said, now that's when Jesus appears, or when the Messiah appears, whoever he is, he's not going to be somebody saying, isn't that a good-looking guy? Look at there, a good-looking guy. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom the people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. Now this, I think, is the key verse, right? Verse 4. The King James Version said we considered him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. You know what? I think what's being addressed here and what Jesus' life addressed, and a part of the point of Christ becoming or taking upon human flesh. A part of our life, I can say I believe this personally. Sometimes I feel that God is against me. Now the Bible in the New Testament does say that when we're lost, we're at enmity with God. It's like we're the enemies of God. But sometimes we feel, we say this, someone up there doesn't like me. Someone up there is out to get me. We say that often. Human beings, we look up to the heavens and Ted Danson had a line, and he was in a television series called Decker, and he was kind of having a bad day. He played a doctor, a local MD in that TV series, but he was having a bad day. One day he was just kind of stepping off the curb and was going to cross the street, and there was just a huge mud hole there, and he stepped right into it, and his foot just sunk up in the water and the mud up to his ankle. Ted Danson's character, Dr. Decker, looked up into the skies, and he said, I love your work. I love your work. That was classic. Look at there. So he was thinking, and it's not that the mud puddle had magically appeared or that it was hidden in some way or someone pushed him. He actually wasn't paying attention and he didn't look, and it was there all the time, and he stepped into it. It was completely 100% his fault to step into a water hole, a pothole in the street, and yet through many things in our life, just exactly like that, we think, well, God is punishing me. God is out to get me. God is angry at me. And sometimes we even threaten our children and say, if you do this or that, God will get you. That was in the old television series Maude. That was her number one byline. God will get you for that. God will get you for that. Not only a threat, but we feel like a reality. Here in Isaiah is saying, this is the voice of God saying, when you see him, you're going to feel like, and that's what people were thinking as Jesus hung upon the cross. That's what people were thinking as Jesus was being flogged. That's what they looked at when they saw the humble life that Jesus lived. They said, that God's after that guy. God is against him. When Jesus was upon the cross, they said, well, he's getting what he deserves. What goes around comes around. The chickens are coming home to roost. This is somebody who lied and he deceived people. He falsely claimed to be the Messiah, and now look, here he is. He's finally getting what he deserves. He said, when the people see this Messiah, they're going to say, yeah, God is punishing him. That's what they're going to say. This had been orchestrated by God. There's no question about it. Jesus was to suffer. The Messiah was to be a suffering servant. It was a part of the plan. Jesus knew that this was what God required. But it's very important for me. Jesus presented to us, this is what it looks like when it appears that God is against you. You would think that the Son of God, that the promised one, that the anointed one, the chosen one, that he would live an ideal life, free from pain and suffering and want. And yet, a part of the reason for Jesus coming here was to experience this and for us to be able to see him being thirsty, being hungry, having pain, being tired and weary, falling asleep in the midst of a storm just because he was just ragged, worn out.
Well, the whole point is, he understands it when we hurt.
That's right.
He understands it when we cry. He remembers what that's like.
Exactly. We often have politicians and leaders and people who are to represent us, and I fail to see often if they have any idea what it means or what it's like to be you and me. What it's like to be an average American or a citizen of the world. If they have lived, the Kennedys have been wealthy ever since before any of the children were born. The Kennedy family began during the time of Prohibition, building a great empire. Not new money, not old money, but new money. They didn't come over wealthy. They were just immigrants. Irish immigrants. But they were wealthy, and wonder, what does a Kennedy know about going to work every day and working in the plant of the factory or putting in 60 or 80 hours a week, struggling, striving? Though people didn't generally want to hear this, Isaiah is telling us this Messiah. In verse 5 he says, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. I'm reminded of, it was actually a Christmas musical. It was presented by the teen or youth group at our church many years ago at Willie Springs. The title of the musical was, What a Strange Way to Save the World. What a strange way to save the world. Instead of the Messiah sweeping in from the clouds and rescuing his people and punishing the wicked, he placed himself, he came through humble means. He was born in a stable, grew up in a poor village and a poor family, and was given to be abused and mistreated by the pagans of this world. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each one has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. You see, he says, we're like sheep. You know what usually happened to sheep? They were sacrificed. He says, we're like the sheep, but the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. We were the ones supposed to be sacrificed, but he became the sacrifice. They knew exactly what was being spoken of here. This kind of Messiah, it doesn't say he's going to topple over the kingdoms or bring the emperors to bay. He says he's going to suffer. And God is going to punish him instead of punishing us. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Though he had done no violence, nor of any deceit was in his mouth, yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life. In other words, after he suffered it, he'll come back to life again and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Isaiah here says, all of this about suffering and about God pouring out his wrath on this person. And then he says, there's going to be victory. Then comes the victory. Then comes the great reward. Then comes the great light. And so, it's reflecting of the death, the burial. It says he'll be buried with the rich. Buried in a rich man's tomb he was, wasn't he? So this is very profound. Not the kind of Messiah people were looking for, but it was the kind of Messiah that the true Messiah was to be. Jesus fits this. Most telling, there is in Acts chapter 8, when the Ethiopian is traveling back from Jerusalem. He's been there. It says he fears God. In other words, he's a proselyte. And yet, because he was a great, powerful man, he was a great, powerful man among the Ethiopians, to Candace, the queen. But because he was a eunuch, there's an Old Testament verse that says that if a man is damaged, as it says, if his private parts are damaged in any way, he cannot be baptized. He cannot be cleansed. He cannot enter the faith. He can't participate. But this Ethiopian was someone who was pursuing God, seeking the God of Israel. He was coming back. And I believe that he probably was shown respect. He probably was shown great deference. I don't know. He may have been mistreated or rejected. But he's on his way back. He's coming through the desert with his entourage. And I believe that he's returning at every turn. They would say, well, yeah, we have great honor and respect for you, or not, but we just, because you're a eunuch, you can only go so far. He's reading in his chariot there, and he's, as in ancient times, or even in our own previous country times, when people read, they used to read out loud. It was just a custom. If you were going to read a book, you just read it out loud. He was reading, and Philip had been sent there and led there by the Holy Spirit, and he could tell that he was reading from the prophet Isaiah, passage we were looking at just now. And Philip kind of came up there, just a nobody, probably looked like a nobody, very important man, approached his chariot, and he said, heard you reading there. He had a scroll. He had his own scroll. Now, you probably have a Bible or two Bibles or three Bibles. People back then didn't have scrolls. They were kept at the synagogue. Nobody had one in their home unless you were very wealthy. They were hand copied. They were on animal skins or papyrus. They were very, very, very valuable. This Ethiopian had one. Philip said, I heard you reading from the prophet Isaiah. Do you understand what you're reading? The Ethiopian said, how can I unless someone explains it to me? I imagine many people had tried to explain to him, but not many people had a good explanation from the people he'd just been with for the prophet Isaiah's writings in 52 and 53. And the Bible says that he began right there where that Ethiopian was reading, and he began to teach unto him Jesus. So this is talking about Jesus. It's not something that we just invented as Christians. It's something that Philip saw when he saw Jesus. It was very obvious to him, and that was his faith. That's what you know what the Ethiopian said? He said, okay, here's some water right here. Some water right there. What prohibits me from being baptized? They wouldn't baptize him in Jerusalem. You had to be circumcised and you had to be baptized in order to convert to the Jewish faith. And so he said, all right, what hinders me? Here's some water. And Philip said, there's only one thing, only one reason why you shouldn't be baptized. He says, but if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and believe that God has raised him from the dead, he says, you can be baptized. He said, well, I believe that. So he said, all right, let's get out in the water. And they did. He baptized him. Now, that's why we believe that baptism is very important. It's not something that was invented by Christians. For many, many years, Jews have been baptizing people for their own cleansing, for their own rituals of cleansing, and also to bring converts into their faith, into Judaism. That's why when John the Baptist was baptizing out in the wilderness, they didn't go out there and say, what are you doing? They said, why are you baptizing? Why are you baptizing? And he said, there's one who's coming, who's going to baptize you in fire and the Holy Spirit. There's no prohibition. There's nothing in the Old Testament. You see, if a person was a eunuch, they were saying, you're not going to be able to go to heaven. There are lots of things that we use today and say, well, this has happened to you, or this is the kind of person you are. This is the circumstance you're in, and that means you can't become a Christian. And so the Ethiopian was saying, look, I've got this problem. I've got something about me that I can't change. Can I go to heaven? And Philip said, yeah, but it's not by being baptized. You got to believe in Jesus. Then I can baptize you, and baptism's great. But he says, you got to believe in Jesus, because that's the deal breaker. That's the deal maker right there. And he said, well, I believe it. I've seen the light. So that's the story of Christ. Well, God bless you all. We're going to continue in Isaiah. I'm going to let you go from our Sunday school lesson, and I trust that you will join us later on for our 11 o'clock worship hours, just in a little while, about 20 minutes. God bless you all. I saw you were watching here, Danny, and you waved and I waved back. What happens when I do that?